You're listening to Mistreated. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. A child with ADHD will receive an estimated 20,000 corrective or negative messages by age 10, this according to William Dodson, a noted psychiatrist. Historically, ADHD has been seen as a disorder that affects primarily boys. Girls have been largely ignored. Consider that while the symptoms of ADHD were first identified back in 1798, it wasn't until the 1990s that science began to study how ADHD presents in girls and how it might be affecting them. ADHD was formally recognized as a mental disorder by the American Psychiatric Association, the APA, in the 1960s. And back then, it was called a, quote, hyperkinetic reaction of childhood. It would later be called ADD, or attention deficit disorder. In 1987, the APA changed the name to ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Then, in 2013, the APA reclassified it as a neurodevelopmental disorder with 3 presentations: primarily hyperactive and impulsive, primarily inattentive, and a combination of the two. In the little time ADHD has been studied in girls, researchers have discovered many differences in how it presents compared to boys. The signs that we mostly associate with ADHD, hyperactivity, and impulsive behaviors are ones that usually impact boys. In girls, it's often the second subset, an internal presentation: daydreaming, self-blame, masking, and disassociation. When they were younger, girls with ADHD tend to do well in school. So often, teachers don't think there is anything wrong, but many mask or hide their symptoms to fit in with their peers. And if they're unable to be organized or struggle in class, it is seen as a personal failing. Experts say ADHD is just as prevalent with girls as it is with boys, but girls are underdiagnosed. And that, quote, boys and men are more likely than girls and women to be referred for services, even when their symptom profiles are exactly the same. Until 1999, 81% of ADHD studies were on men. So it is easy to see how ADHD presentation in women was not recognized or understood. But in the 1990s, Dr. Stephen Hinshaw led groundbreaking research on how ADHD impacts girls, and the study has become known as the BGALS, or Berkeley Girls study. The BGALS study was a milestone and helped to establish ADHD as a serious condition for women and girls. In an interview on the podcast Hyperfocus with Ray Jacobson, Dr. Hinshaw said this: "For way too long, clinicians have thought, well, it must be depression and anxiety that goes along with being female. ADHD is a guy thing." Dr. Hinshaw explained that undiagnosed ADHD in girls can have, quote, devastating consequences. The BGAL study found that girls with the combined type of ADHD were at a higher risk of self-harming or attempting suicide. Studies have also found that girls with ADHD were at higher risk of unplanned pregnancies, more likely to experience dating violence and intimate partner violence. Teens with ADHD are more likely to become pregnant and, quote, are more likely to exhibit riskier sexual behaviors. Women with ADHD also suffer from depression, low self-esteem, sleep disorders, and fibromyalgia. A study published in the British Journal of Psychiatry in January 2025 found that women with ADHD have a shorter lifespan, 9 years shorter than women without. On today's episode, we speak to writer Carla Ciccone, who became one of the growing numbers of women to be diagnosed with ADHD during the pandemic. We speak to her about the, quote, female protective effect, the challenges she felt in school as a young child, and why she wrote the book Nowhere Girl: Life as a Member of ADHD's Lost Generation. She joins me now. Welcome to the podcast. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, can I just say, your book is just like breathtaking.
Thank you.
You talk about so many different things. And as I said to you before we started recording, we go where you're comfortable.
Okay.
But first off, who are the Nowhere Girls?
Oh, well, we're a group of women and girls who were kind of left out of scientific research for a really long time and learned a little bit too late that our brains operate differently and that so much of what we blamed ourselves for in our life isn't necessarily our fault. It's because we have ADHD or autism or other neurodivergence. So.
And science just forgot to include you.
Yeah.
We'll talk more about the Nowhere Girls,
Okay.
but I wanted to talk to you first. This is a memoir, but it's also, you've done a lot of studies and historical research on it.
Yeah.
We'll get back to that in just a second.
Okay.
But during COVID lockdowns, remember that time?
Oh.
It's so much fun.
It feels like a dream now, like a nightmare.
Right? It's just like, I look back, I'm like, oh, that's why everything's the way it is now.
We didn't recover.
We
really
did not
didn't.
recover. It broke everything.
Yeah.
But during COVID, at age 39, you're a mother to a toddler. You were officially diagnosed with ADHD.
Yeah.
You were also diagnosed with depression, generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, and perfectionism.
Yes.
After the diagnosis, you write that, quote, you found it impossible to talk about ADHD at first. How come?
I think because I had the stereotype of ADHD of being a little boy's disorder and
like
hyperactive and disruptive and kind of like not the kind of kid I wanted to be associated with when I was in school. And so I think I had a lot of shame just from my misperception of what ADHD was. I also was hanging out with mostly my family members at the time who weren't on the same journey as me, right? They weren't researching ADHD. They weren't overly concerned with mental health and what was going on. So I wasn't comfortable talking to them about it because they kind of, oh yeah, everybody has that. Like I got those kind of responses. So it was something that I just went through on my own.
So it's interesting because you do write about your family and how you grew up. So the back of your mind, you were worried about the stigma attached to you having ADHD, but not being an answer to maybe the way that you were, but something that made you even more different.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, there's nothing worse than trying to have open and honest conversations about mental health with somebody who isn't ready to or doesn't want to hear it or isn't on the same page as you. And so I think I kept a lot to myself because the people I was around weren't on the same page.
One of the diagnoses that you received was perfectionism. And you write this, while I was grateful for the diagnoses, both the ones I was expecting and the ones that surprised me, I was also bothered by them, mostly because they provided reasons for why I was struggling so hard, but they didn't offer a way out.
Yeah.
What did you mean by this?
Well, I mean, when you get a diagnosis, I got a prescription for stimulant medication, but I didn't get a handbook on how to live your life with these 4 disorders that you just got diagnosed with. So again, it was kind of a lonely process for me. So I got on the stimulant medication, which made my day-to-day a bit easier. But for me, I had to go back and unpack sort of the story I'd been telling myself about my life. And that took a lot of time and therapy.
Well, you write about a childhood where you were different and you felt like you were to blame for that difference. You were called lazy. You did well in school until you didn't.
Yeah.
You had a hard time making friends and feeling secure in those relationships. But you're right. My relationship to mental illness was complicated and in line with someone who grew up in a working class, first generation family. I looked at it the same way I did those who put pineapple on pizza with intrigue and distrust. I actually like pineapple on pizza.
It's okay. This is a safe space.
This is a safe space. But like, I'm just, because when I was reading it, I was rooting for you in the sense of like, maybe you felt all these things, but maybe you just kind of felt, okay, it wasn't me.
Yeah.
Something else was going on.
Yeah.
Like a sense of relief, but you felt angry, stressed.
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated when you get diagnosed so late with something that you have had all your life. I felt all those things: angry, frustrated, and also just sort of unseen, right? Because I so much of what I went through was blamed on personality defects, like you mentioned, like you're lazy or you're flighty or you're not a serious person or whatever. So
how did ADHD show up in your life?
Well, at the time, it showed up in my parenting. So it was my main way of motivating myself was always to be really mean to myself, to sort of spur myself into action, to get the things done. Because with ADHD, you lack executive function. So the little things that like make your day easier, we don't naturally do those things.
Like getting up on time?
Getting up on time, or just like planning your day, like knowing what to prioritize in your day, knowing the things you need to do and like the right order to do them in. Often what I will do is get sort of like paralyzed with fear about doing those things and then not do any of them.
So which makes everything worse.
It makes everything worse. And then you panic and then you do it in a rush at the end. Sometimes it works out because we have the ability to hyperfocus when we really need to. And so like if I have a big deadline and I'm almost missing it, like I can pull an all-nighter and do it. I mean, less now because I'm old and a child, but like I could.
You're being humbled by age.
Yes, but I could. But yeah, so those little things, they really add up. And so I feel like the older you get, the more that it is more apparent how behind you are in those things, because doing adult life is just so much harder for you, right?
And I guess too, because I'm noticing online, a lot of moms are finding out that they're like, oh, maybe I have ADHD.
Yeah.
What do you think that is?
Well, it's interesting because anytime there's like a big hormonal disrupt, like when puberty or after you have a baby or in perimenopause or menopause, your estrogen, which has like a protective effect on your brain, is dipping. And so I think that that's what we're seeing. Like when there's a new mom and she's like, her life is a mess and she's like, oh, do I have ADHD? I think there's a huge hormonal equation there.
I want to come back to that in a minute when we talk about medication.
Yes.
But you did a lot of research for the book. It's a memoir, but it's also the history of how girls were not even considered to have ADHD. Who is Stephen Henshaw?
I love Stephen Henshaw. He's a professor at the University of California, Berkeley, and he was the first researcher to look at girls with ADHD in the 90s. So he did a study called B-Gals, and it was a study that looked at, I think, 6-year-olds to 13-year-olds, and he's followed them since that time. So now they're like in their 40s and 50s, I think. And so they're the first longitudinal study we have of women with ADHD. And so in their lives, we can see a lot of the trends and a lot of the commonalities between us all.
Well, I mean, it's amazing that he did that because at the time it wasn't even part of the conversation.
No, yeah.
So what did he find about ADHD and how it impacts girls?
So he found that it's a more internal experience. And what happens is when puberty hits, a lot of that, if it hasn't been identified, it turns into anxiety and depression. And so there's a lot of misdiagnosing girls in that age group because the hormones take over and depression takes hold, and that's what gets identified first.
And when you say internal, I guess when we have what we think is ADHD, we have the image of the boy who's really hyper disruptive in class, but for girls, it's more something that's happening inside them.
Yeah, so it's kind of that same hyperactivity. So it's called inattentive ADHD, this type. And men can have it too. It's not just girls, but it's predominantly girls that get it. And it is that hyperactivity sort of turned inward. So it's a lot of daydreaming, like listening in class, but not actually hearing what the teacher is saying. It's a lot of like forgetting your homework and doing it at the last minute, but still doing it. So nobody's noticing that you are struggling with anything really, because it's all happening within you.
Rumination, maybe?
Oh yeah, rumination, big time.
So
because you have you have that emotional dysregulation piece of, we get these really big feelings and don't know how to manage them. And that combined with all the other stuff is just kind of like, it turns into a lot of low self-esteem. Yeah.
You write about masking, self-blame, and that in school, especially in the early years, girls might do well in school and actually often considered to be gifted.
Yes.
But in schools, there isn't a masking screening tool for ADHD, and the current screening and diagnostic tools for ADHD were based on research that was done on boys.
Yeah.
How does this harm young girls who have ADHD and are struggling internally?
I think that that's like the biggest contributor to the low self-esteem that we see in girls with ADHD, is that it's such a lonely experience, and whether they get a good school experience or not is fully dependent on if their teacher understands ADHD and can identify it in a kid that maybe hasn't been diagnosed, which is a huge task for a teacher. And you need a very caring and astute teacher to even be able to do that. And then you might have a teacher like that one year and then have a teacher that's completely not understanding.
So it's up and down for the student.
And I think like my experience was like that too. Like some years I had more understanding teachers that, knew how to connect with me and my interests and kind of like encourage me. And some years it was the complete opposite. So
there was a lot of different things that you wrote about in the book that just broke my heart, took my breath away. But it's you cited a study that showed that, quote, it's estimated that a child with ADHD receives 20,000 more corrective or negative messages by age 10, and their self-esteem suffers as a result.
Yeah.
As a mother now, and looking back on your own childhood, you think what?
Oh, I mean, I can feel the effects of the 20,000. I felt them when I was young, and I can still feel them. So I think, that's a big part of the reason why I wanted to write this book and to sort of change the way I was talking to myself and parenting myself, because I knew I had this job of parenting a little girl and who is a lot like me. And so it's so weird when you become a parent, you kind of hear the automatic reactions of your own parents, and it comes so out of nowhere. You're like, wait, I didn't want to talk to you like that. Where did that come from? And so I think the idea that I needed to change that and like learn a different way of parenting her, it was huge for me.
And it's hard.
It's so hard.
Because it's like you feel it because you experienced those things. You want to protect them from that.
Yeah.
But then the way you were parented was in an environment where no one understood what was going on with you.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. And so having this awareness, it doesn't necessarily make it easier.
Right. You probably are harder on yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it is another reason to be hard on yourself. So it is a slippery slope there. And I do think I see a lot of women, especially on social media, being like, I need to parent gentle, and these are the things I need to do to be a good mom. And a part of that is great, and I'm glad people are thinking that way, but also it does seem to be like the next avenue that women are being hard on ourselves for is like just overanalyzing our parenting and fixating on it.
Yeah, kids are very humbling.
Yeah.
In so many ways. So in writing in this book, you did a survey with the Nowhere Girls, and you write that, quote, a staggering 90% of Nowhere girls who answered my question about childhood trauma said they experienced it.
Yeah.
Did that shock you?
It saddened me, but it didn't shock me because my own story was full of childhood trauma, and from speaking with Dr. Hinshaw, I kind of knew that the girls he had studied also had higher rates of childhood trauma and substance use and all of that. So I was kind of expecting it, but...
Can you explain that a bit more? So is it genetic, or is it if something happens to you, like epigenetic?
So it is genetic. It's heritable. So 80%. So it's like if your parents had it, you have an 80% chance of also getting it. But yes, the epigenetics, the environment that you grew up in, if it was calm and peaceful and organized and, praised you for the right reasons, you might not develop ADHD for a long time or might not show the symptoms of it. And maybe it'll take you until like you become a mother and you're like, oh, like everything that I had in place has fallen away. And that's when you start expressing symptoms of ADHD. But there is something called the female protective effect.
What's that?
So it's because women have, I think, extra responsibilities on them from when they're quite young, and we learn how to sort of mask, and our lives are kind of set up in a way that protects us from everything falling away and the ADHD symptoms taking over. That's why sometimes it takes longer.
You write about masking more in the book. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so masking is, I mean, it kind of is a way of putting on a mask so that you can blend in your life and also just like achieve what you need to achieve throughout the day. Like I was talking about executive dysfunction earlier, and a lot of people use masking to just get through the tasks of the day. And I used to do that by being mean to myself and motivating myself by being like, come on, you could do this. It's also a huge part of masking is getting along socially and blending into different groups. And in school, I kind of like collected traits from my friends that I thought were like doing it well, and then just sort of tried them on for size. And I think I still carry some of that with me now, right?
Because your mom meant, like, when you're in the book, you write about how your mom picked up on that.
Yes.
That you would, within certain friendships that you had, you started being more like that person.
Yeah.
You said that ADHD you inherited, like 80%.
Yes.
So now that you know you have it, and you look back on your own family, does everything make sense?
Oh, yeah. Very chaotic. Yes, it does make sense. And, you know, I have an aunt on my dad's side who was diagnosed when she was 55. So it's kind of like easier to point to that side of the family's genes as where it's coming from. But just, but it's hard because we're also Italian. So like the loudness, the talking over each other, the interrupting, it's like, do we have ADHD or are we just Italian? So you could see why it might take us longer to get diagnosed.
Have you had conversations with your family since you had ADHD?
Yes, and you know, my aunt, who I mentioned, she's very into like the ADHD education and learning more, and we've had some really good conversations. My parents aren't as, I think they're interested in it, but it's more just like, I think they still think of it as a bit of an excuse. And it's really hard to get out of that mindset of like, you know, viewing mental health issues as weakness. So it is harder to talk to them about ADHD. Yeah. And I mean, I can empathize with them because I understand where that came from. But yeah, it's hard to not be able to.
That's another thing. Like once you become a parent, I feel like I didn't have the best relationships with my parents.
Yeah.
But since I had kids, I understand them more.
Yeah. You can understand how they developed.
Yeah.
And why they were the way they were.
Yeah. I think I show them more grace.
Yeah.
You write in the book too that quote, being diagnosed with depression and anxiety or misdiagnosed with a mood disorder long before ADHD is so customary among women. It's basically a rite of passage.
Yeah.
And quote, to me, the most shocking misdiagnosis for women with ADHD is also one of the most common, bipolar 2 disorder or BD.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, so with bipolar disorder, you get like manic episodes and then depressive episodes. And so if ADHD doesn't get identified early and these patterns sort of take hold, I could see why you might get misdiagnosed with this because your hyperfocusing and your enthusiasm and your impulsivity might be misread as mania. But the difference is with the bipolar, that starts in adolescence. So the episodes start in adolescence, whereas ADHD, it starts long before then, which is why it's really important to get a thorough assessment to figure out like what's going on. Because I've had friends who were misdiagnosed with bipolar and on the wrong medication for like 10 years. And
That causes a lot of harm,
yes,
isn't it?
Yeah.
But I can also see why that's happening, because historically, women, if you haven't considered that women and girls have ADHD,
Yeah.
you won't put them in that category. You
Yeah.
won't even conser it.
Yeah.
So the
and
other
bipolar
one
is like thought of more as like a women's disorder.
And why is that, Carla?
Because sexism.
We're laughing, but
Yeah, I mean, the history of women's mental health is like
it's hysteria, right?
Yeah, it's hysteria. That's where it comes from. And, you know, what they were willing to diagnose women with were the hysterical diagnoses versus, you know, the more typical male diagnosis of like autism or ADHD. They didn't even think of that. So,
Which also, I can see why families might want to shy away from a diagnosis like ADHD because of that stigma, too, right?
Yeah.
So the harm just kind of domino effect.
Yeah, for sure.
What other conditions are women with ADHD likely to have?
Oh, so many. I mean, a lot of us are hypermobile. So, meaning like our joints bend more easily, but also we have more pain in our bodies because of that. And that's something I didn't even know about until I went to this like physiotherapist who told me about it. But there's more depression and anxiety, as you mentioned. Even things like eczema and asthma and diabetes.
Stutters too?
Yeah, stutters, tics, all sorts of, like basically everything you can think of is more common in this population.
You write that there is also, quote, emerging evidence that some girls with anorexia may in fact be suffering from autism, but because it's not a typical male symptom, it's been missed. Similar studies exist for ADHD, but the pool of research is not large. And there is also, quote, a connection between ADHD, eating disorders, and gender dysphoria.
Yes.
And I'm not, I was just like, I want to throw everything against the wall. And that, quote, despite women with ADHD being under-researched, there is depressing amount of evidence that the disorder puts us at an increased risk for unhealthy romantic relationships, higher divorce rates, and more unsatisfying sexual relationships. It also substantially increases the likelihood of experiencing intimate partner violence.
Yeah.
It just feels like these are really big things.
I know, but I meant what I said when it's kind of like everything bad you can think of happens more in this population. Yeah.
Why did you want to write this book?
Because it was a book that I wanted when I got diagnosed. And I mean, I've gotten so many messages from people who have ADHD and have found the book and have been just like, this is what I needed to read and has made me feel so much better about everything that I've gone through. Yeah, I wrote it for myself and all the other Nowhere girls.
So do you understand yourself better now?
I think so. Like, I feel like I understand myself a little too well. I'm like over-aware of everything.
But there must be some grace that you show yourself now.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that was like I wanted the ultimate takeaway of the book to be, like, we can't really control what we have access to. We can't control if we have access to the resources that make life with ADHD easier, but we can control working on being nicer to ourselves, because so many of us struggle with that same like automatic negative patterns of thinking, that we can at least try to say, oh, I'm doing that again. I'm trying to, motivate myself by being mean to myself. I'm going to take a step back and I'm just going to like try to be nice to myself.
It's been so nice talking to you, Carla. I only have a few more minutes left, but I wanted to talk to you about some solutions and maybe what policymakers can do. We talked a little bit about the hormonal shift that happens in adolescence. And because women and girls weren't considered to be impacted by ADHD, the research on ADHD has centered around boys to the point where if someone needs medication for ADHD, that medication wasn't studied on how it impacts women's hormones through puberty, pregnancy, or perimenopause. Yeah. Which is quite shocking.
It is shocking. And I spoke with a Swedish doctor in the book who they have a different model of care that is basically gynecologists are working with psychiatrists and psychologists for this ADHD population to see whether it is hormones that people need or ADHD medication. And I just think that's so lovely. Can you just imagine if our doctors were able to work together collaboratively like that and just figure out, like, do the best for us, like for the individual patients, because so much of it is just put on us to figure out. And, you know, if you have ADHD, you have a hard time just sorting things out in general. So it would be really nice to have, like, the healthcare system backing you up.
You wrote about, like, how you came upon your ADHD diagnosis, and you were already part of the system. Mm-hmm. But for other people, it seems to cost a lot of money.
Yes.
And you also have to have the curiosity around, do I have this thing?
Yeah, and you have to have some knowledge of it first, right?
Yes. So what do you want to say to policymakers about the urgency in course correcting this?
Well, when I last looked into it, I think family doctors study ADHD for like half a day in their training. And so they're not getting trained on what it looks like in women or even adult men, quite frankly. And I know when I first reached out to my family doctor about it, she said, "I'm so sorry, I just don't know enough about it to give you an assessment." And so I think that if that door could open a little bit more, if family doctors were more informed about it, then it would free up so much space in our healthcare system, because we have like 3-year wait lists to get in to see psychiatrists who could do the assessment. So, I mean, like everything else, we just need more doctors and more training.
And what do you say to parents who maybe think that their child isn't trying hard enough, or, you know, or maybe they think that they have ADHD?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, in the system, it's hard to navigate, but if you do think your child has ADHD, I think you need to be their advocate. Like, that's what you become, right? So you need to find a way, or go to different doctors and research and figure it out. That's basically what our healthcare system has come to at this point, is just like, you need to become a researcher.
And finally in schools, because I think this is where this is really magnified.
Yes.
I think teachers are heroes.
Yes.
And having a child in the Ontario public school system, they're doing what they can with what they have.
Absolutely.
But they have certain markers when they're looking for children who might need additional supports.
Yeah.
But when it comes to girls, they might not always have what is perceived to be those markers.
Sometimes girls, because they become so good at masking at such a young age, they don't get identified. So the teachers aren't missing them necessarily because they don't care, but because girls are so good at pretending. So it does take a really astute teacher to notice what's going on with girls. But the signs are there, right? Like, there's daydreaming, there's like jittery, like fidgeting, there's talking a lot, like just being a chatterbox, and like forgetting things. And, you know, there are signs that set little girls with ADHD apart from the population, but you just have to notice them
and know what it is, right?
Yeah, and know what to do about it too.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I didn't ask you?
I don't think so. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for writing this book. I think it's going to help so many people, and thank you so much for sharing so many parts of yourself with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Nem.
This was Mistreated. Thanks for listening. You can follow our show wherever you get your podcasts so that you can get notified each time a new episode is available. We would love to hear your feedback. You can write me an email at mistreatedpodcast@tvo.org or reach out to me on social media. This week's episode was produced by Matthew O'Mara and me and edited by Colin Kish, digital shorts by Ariana Longley, camera work by Max Dussey, teleprompting by Christy McLeod. Production support from Jonathan Hallowell and TVO's Digital Media Services team. Laurie Few is the executive producer of Digital. John Ferry is vice president, programming and content. Thanks so much for listening.